Hey friends, there's something new from our sponsor Text Control. Their new product, DS Server, provides document services out of the box for all platforms and languages. Whether you want to integrate document creation, editing, sharing, or collaboration into your web app, DS Server provides the back-end technology to integrate that professional document processing. For example, using DS Server, you could integrate an MS Word compatible document editor into pure JavaScript, Angular, or an ASP.NET Core application. You can create PDF documents using Web API calls or even request electronic signatures from end users. DS Server is also hosted on-premise in your infrastructure or with your cloud provider, such as Microsoft Azure. And you can test DS Server without downloading anything. Create your first DS Server application in minutes by requesting a trial token on their dedicated website at dsserver.io. That's DSServer.io. Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman, and it's another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Brian Douglas. He's a staff developer advocate at GitHub and all-around internet raconteur. I'll find you all over the place. You got a bunch of cool things you're working on.
Yeah. Hey, Scott. And also Hansel Minute listeners. I am on the internet.
You are on the internet. It's so nice to be on the internet right now. I feel like I have littered the internet with not only a bunch of blog posts, but also just a million little 1- and 2-page URLs that are memorable, that are like initiatives that I'm trying to get like my voice out there. And I feel like you and I have kind of lived parallel lives in that respect.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely, we crossed paths at CodeLand conferences in the past, and I've definitely been a listener of the podcast off and on for, 7 years, 8 years.
Oh, wow.
I don't know.
Well, See, that's flattery will get you everywhere here on Hansel Minutes. I need to tell all the guests to tell me that they are listeners, because usually beforehand I say, do you listen to the show? And they go, I didn't get a chance or whatever. And then they don't know me from Adam. So that's cool that you've listened to the show before. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was on Code Newbies, and I think I learned of you through Saran originally. So that's my original connection, her Twitter account.
Fantastic. And Saran Yitbarek, for those who may not know, the host of the Code Newbies podcast, creator of the Code Newbies community, and now has a great product called Disco that you can see at heydisco.com. Super cool stuff. And actually, Saran, you and I all have something in common, which is that we like to knock down any kind of gates or barriers that keep people from being not only awesome on the internet, but being awesome with open source.
Yeah, indeed. I am a career switcher, and I've sort of had to figure out my path into now GitHub as an employee and also GitHub user, and I'm super happy to talk about that.
What are some barriers? Like when we hear the word gatekeeping, I think some people might think that that's just a buzzword, or it's something that a certain segment of the internet uses to imply that there's a problem when there's not a problem. But when I hear the word gatekeeping, I think that there's a barrier, there's a legitimate barrier that's preventing someone from being awesome.
Yeah, I would say like a simple gatekeeping. I don't know if anybody on the show listens and writes JavaScript, but I write JavaScript a lot. And there's so many sort of hoops and hurdles to jump over when you start writing JavaScript. So like, should you use TypeScript? Should you not use TypeScript? Are you a real developer if you don't use types? Like those are all things that I don't think as an early stage developer you need to actually care about. I think just sort of getting the concepts out of the way is really the focus. And if you want to learn TypeScript, or if you want to use, C# or you want to use something different, like you can cross that bridge or open that gate when you get to that point.
It seems like we're telling people that there's this really cool religion that we want them to get excited about, and it's called open source and the internet. And like, join our religion. It's really great. But then they get ready to join and they find out that there's all these sub-religions where it's like, no, like you need to use Ruby or you need to use C#. And if you don't, then you're like not a member of our club.
Yeah, there's I guess an analogy or anecdote from my own life. I have a twin brother, and when we were like around 8 or 9, we thought Boy Scouts was the coolest thing ever. We like begged our mom to take us to Boy Scout meetings. And then we figured out when we get there, you have to buy an outfit, which my mom could not afford. And then also you had to pay for badges, which also my mom could not afford. So needless to say, we only went to 2 meetings. We found out that it wasn't for us. Well, I guess it wasn't for us because we couldn't afford it. And I think sometimes like, thanks to open source, a lot of stuff is free, but sometimes free comes with a trade-off. Like, do you have to read a bunch of issues, or you have to dig in the documentation, or do you have to write React code since you were 7 years old in 2008, which is not possible because it didn't come out till like 2013ish. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, I think that there's gatekeeping, which is behaviors and personalities and cultures that prevent people from being successful, and then there's barriers, where a barrier might be I don't have a laptop, I don't have good internet,
yeah.
I don't speak English well, or whatever, and those are all things that can slow people down in their path towards doing cool things on the internet.
Yeah, and on my GitHub profile, I have one of my title is I make the open source accessible for others, and I think with the barriers, like we can solve those by making sure our docs are in multiple languages, or making sure that events are not happening only in the U.S. time zones, because now we're all doing events remotely. So making sure the barriers of entry are accessible. But when you sort of navigate past those barriers, or you sort of get to the point where now there's no more barriers preventing you from being there, then the gatekeeping is where sort of that starts activates, and you're just like, I didn't really know. Like when I opted into Node.js as my language of choice, I had to also choose React or Vue, or another decision that really doesn't matter at this time in your career.
Mm-hmm. When someone is getting started in open source, it takes a certain inner fire, a certain inner personality to go and you're putting yourself out there, you're putting your code out there. I have heard from maintainers on the other side, the people who are the recipients of said newbie, that it takes a lot of emotional energy for them to kind of like, quote unquote, deal with the noobs. And I think that they use that as an excuse to be either rude or crisp or whatever. And I get like everyone's hurting right now and everything sucks right now, but what's the right balance between the work that the newbie puts in and the work that the maintainer puts up with in order to find like a thing that makes them both successful?
Yeah. So I always leverage this quote. I probably overuse this, but Stan Lee, creator of Marvel Comics, he had this quote where it's just, imagine every issue is someone's first issue. So imagine like you're going to GitHub and this is your first, like your legitimate first issue. And if you don't really get welcomed, or I went to contribute to a JavaScript project, a pretty popular one. And I did go to contribute to an issue. And when I found out that I knew I had what it took to understand the problem and solve it, I then found out, oh, by the way, this issue is actually not for you. Like they didn't say it like that, but basically this is actually not in the roadmap. So we're going to basically punt on that. Thank you for the PR, but we're just going to keep that sort of sitting here for a long time until we quietly close it. Creating like when I go to like a hotel, like the first thing I have is like, I have a folded up, blanket on the side. I have a pillow. I've got like maybe a mint. I've got a robe, depending on how fancy it is. Like there are different key things inside a hotel I expect to be in certain places. And I think with open source and projects, things like having a README, a code of conduct, a contributing MD, those are really good signals to not feel like you have to over mentor or provide too much information and sort of get yourself burnt out, but to at least have a pathway for folks to sort of feel comfortable when they walk into a project.
Well, when you see that mint or that robe, that's a way of the hotel saying, we are happy that you are here. It sounds simple, but the hospitality industry exists because they want you to be there. And then that applied to open source is predicated on the question, do they want me here at all?
Yeah.
Or are they just doing it in the open?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the question that we have to ask as maintainers of projects is like, are we actively taking on contribution? Are we actively mentoring other folks? Or do we put a clear distinction in our README or in our guide to say, hey, thanks for your interest, but for the next 3 months, we're going to focus on this release, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But sometimes with open source projects, we forget that your code's out there. It's in a public repo. Maybe you decided because that was a free way to have your code on the internet in the cloud. So now it's a public repo. But so many projects I've had issues opened up of like people saying this doesn't work for me or such and such. And I've had to go back and say, hey, thank you for your issue. I definitely just kind of shipped this code on a weekend as I had like a really cool idea, or I woke up from a really a big nightmare that I had to fix a problem. And this problem is here. Mm-hmm. Apologies on not really having the proper setup and letting you know. But then that sort of sparks me into now every project I open up, I do have a README. I do have emojis in there to sort of navigate people through and like just like tell them how to sort of set up an npm install, or I talk about a lot of JavaScript because I write a lot of JavaScript, but there's like some clear things we can do within our GitHub repos to make sure that everybody's comfortable. And if they're not comfortable, perhaps maybe make that a private repo. They're free.
What do you say to people who just say, listen, I push the code. I don't really care. It's just there. It's some stuff. I have no emotional bandwidth or energy for any of your comments or questions. Like here, there it is.
Yeah, I would say leverage the features that you have at your fingertips. So like you can turn off issues in GitHub repos. Like I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but you can actually just go in your settings, turn off issues. You can also limit interactions to your projects. It's a feature that GitHub, so I work at GitHub. I mentioned that in the intro, but during Hacktoberfest, there was a feature we shipped. So if you did not want to participate in Hacktoberfest, you can actually limit your interactions to only organization members for 30 days or only for known contributors. So if you've contributed a project, you can then come back and do more contribution, and then you can figure out whatever the future of the project looks like after that.
I had absolutely no idea that you could turn issues off on GitHub. Like, I don't know if I'd want to do that, but that's actually makes sense because if I found them annoying, now I know that that's a thing that I can not worry about anymore.
Yeah, and there's a lot of projects that they grow to a state where they have too much going on. And I don't want to name drop to other projects because other projects, certain projects, they all have their own situations. So some projects prefer Jira tickets, some projects prefer email. Perhaps they only have the code up for open to view, but not open to contribute. So having the signals like you can actually put if you're mirroring GitHub to so you're mirroring your code to GitHub from another source, you can actually have a mirror tag attached to your project. Definitely open up a support ticket if that's what you're doing, just so that way you have clear signals. And for example, WordPress, the open source project, has a mirror on GitHub, but they actually contribute through email and through other channels. So it's a good signal to say, hey, thanks for opening an issue, but go move this somewhere else or wherever it's supposed to be. I had that same example with the Go GitHub library. At the time, Google managed their GitHub project internally, I think through Garrett or some other means. But there was a very clear signal when I opened the issue to say, hey, could you also just open this somewhere else? And nowadays you can automate that. So definitely make it comfortable for everybody, automate it to recreate somewhere else.
You're blowing my mind. I thought I knew GitHub. Of course, I'm talking to you and you work there, but I'm up here looking at WordPress develop and it says, please, they use track for their stuff and they've turned off issues. They've got a clear mirror tag at the top. It says mirrored from, it's nice to have it there and you can follow it. I can even see that it is a true mirror because someone committed just an hour ago. So they're pushing all their stuff there, but it's not a place where you're going to expect anything. How do they do the pull request then if you're doing a mirror?
So
mirrored pull request as well? It's
choose your own adventure. I would say I went through this whole discovery because the first day, so I joined GitHub in 2018. And day one, when I got my laptop, they did the onboarding, taught you how to use GitHub, taught you how to do all this stuff. I was already past that point because I was writing code for a couple of years. I actually went through all the different code bases. I went through GitHub/GitHub, which is the private repo that hosts GitHub's code, and just sort of navigated through sort of the historical record of all the projects. But what I'm getting at is that GitHub's only been around since 2008. So people have been contributing to code in different source control versions and other means. So all those still exist. So at that point, I think like WordPress being around before 2008, it's a hard migration path. I know projects like OpenJDK, they've moved to GitHub. Like that was a whole story they shared at GitHub Universe. So like they are doing a hybrid model where they do PRs, but they also still do email lists and stuff like that. So, and also IRC as well, which I barely touched IRC when I first started writing code professionally. I did do IRC before that, but as far as professionally coding, I've been HipChat, Slack user, Microsoft Teams user since the beginning. So it's just like new generations. They just sort of move all the boomers over to doing what's latest and greatest, which in open source, obviously.
Well, I only accept my PRs on. I only accept my PRs on ICQ, so I insist.
Excellent. As long as you have it written out and documented, it makes it easier for everybody else. And it's a good. Honestly, I think it's fascinating. Yeah, there was I did an upstream contribution. Actually, I didn't end up doing it. I did a contribution to Node.js. It turns out Node.js, the problem that I was trying to solve was not Node.js, it was V8. So then I was told by one of the maintainers that, hey, this is actually an upstream change to V8. Instead, use this Google specific platform, which I completely forgot what it was called. And they pointed me to there, and they're like, okay, this is going to contribute. I'm like, well, first off, guys, like, I'm a GitHub user. I don't know what I'm doing. So then the maintainer went ahead and did that. I was able to migrate those changes back into GitHub from V8, back into Node.js from V8. And that was my first contribution to Node.js. Actually, I think roughly 5 months ago. But it was quite the experience. I learned a ton about JavaScript runtimes, Node.js, just from that one minuscule contribution I made. And sorry, just to be clear for anybody who's listening,
for doing that.
Yeah, I would say, and the change I made was an error message. I just updated the error message to be more descriptive. So anybody can do this. Well, anybody do this with mentorship.
That is really what's important. Anyone can do this. And that is the goal when we talk about removing gatekeeping, about making people successful, is reminding people that literally anyone can do this, and we want them to be successful. Hey friends, I want to share a great deal with you from our friends at CBT Nuggets. Their expert IT training where and when you need it. It's online. You can go and check out what you need from IT training, networking, cloud, security. There's 40 hours of new training added every week. And their team is 100% in-house, and they're all active IT professionals with multiple certifications. They've got virtual labs, so that's on-demand environments that are tailored to the course material that you're taking. So you get to practice networking config, scripts, queries alongside the course. They've even got accountability coaching. So this is a service that's available to all learners with a subscription. It's a coaching team that is actually integrated with the trainer and the content team, so you can talk to a real person. They'll help you craft a personalized learning plan. You can set goals, and they'll check in to help you keep accountable. Now, they've set up a promotional offer for us. It's a free learner offer, so you can go to cbtnuggets.com/Hanselminutes. You just sign up. They've made portions of their most popular courses completely free. You just need a Google account. You can start training right away. And if you sign up for the free learner, you'll be automatically entered into a drawing, and you could win a 6-month premium subscription to CBT Nuggets. That's cbtnuggets.com/Hanselminutes. You and I talked a little bit beforehand about, you act as a mentor often. I've done work as a mentor as well. But you also juxtapose the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. You kind of use those words kind of two different ways.
Yeah, and I do Freudian slip. Sometimes I use one to explain the other one, but to clearly define the two roles, mentorship is I'm going to spend time like getting you unstuck, unblocked. But the difference with sponsorship, I'm going to invest time into you, like time, resources, money. And it's something I really thought about earlier in May of 2020, back when we had the protests that were happening. For our listeners, I'm a Black male. I don't know if you can tell through my voice, but I do identify as Black. And at that time, it was a very challenging time just to be a face in tech. So what I did is to help give back to the community, and as other people were sort of figuring out what's happening, I did a call out on Twitter and said, hey, if anybody's doing open source and you identify as Black, and that was the limit. If you identified as Black, you do open source, and you are a part of GitHub sponsors. So obviously you had to sign up for GitHub sponsors as well. So that was a bit of a barrier of entry, but you just had to sign up. I would sponsor you for a year. And the first people I sponsored $50 a month for a full year. And one of the first people I sponsored was Nick De Jesus. And Nick, he's Black and Puerto Rican. He's based in Boston. And he actually was working on a open source project for Stripe, integrating into the Stripe platform with React hooks. So if you're familiar with those technologies, you understand that. If you don't, definitely check out his project, which is it's a React hook library for Stripe. And he's somebody who I've put time into. Like, he's been on my podcast. He showed up for some GitHub chats as well. And I just gave him a platform because I'm invested in him. I'm sponsoring him. If he wants to talk about his project, I have place for him to talk about his project. And everybody else on sponsor, not just limited to sponsorship, but anybody else I'm investing into, like, you have space. I will give you access. I will introduce you to folks. And that's where I sort of go over and above with the sponsorship versus mentorship, where mentorship, I'll show you a blog post. I'll Stack Overflow with you, I'll Google with you. But when it comes with like sponsorship, I will actually bend over backwards to provide access and privilege, the same privilege that I have today.
I really like that. I often use the term sponsor mentorship to indicate that, I have a little speech that I can give you and I can regale you with my wisdom. But with sponsorship, I want you actively to be successful. I'll bring you into meetings. I'll bring you into opportunities. I will take you along for the ride.
Yeah.
I'll open doors and then I'll step away from the door. So it's a little bit of a wordplay, but I think as you're pointing it out, it has a lot of value because you're calling out the difference between a relationship where an older or a more experienced person kind of talks down to or talks at someone versus someone who is on a journey together and like, hey, let's go, you and me, we're in this together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love turning around and looking for new developers, looking for people who are just getting into the space and this sharing as much wisdom as I can. And if I think the distinction really too as well, where I see like folks not that are like myself who are excited about tech and open source and contributing to projects, but more of like people who just want to learn things, who have that keen interest. Like when I see that into somebody, it makes me want to sponsor them. And that's why I'm sponsoring like way too many people in GitHub sponsors because I'm just excited about all those folks. I'm sponsoring any from age 16 all the way up to 50 plus folks who express interest in what I'm doing and what I'm trying to accomplish and what they're trying to accomplish. I say yes, and I'm not opening up the pocketbook for more sponsorship, but I do recommend you check out my sponsorship page and reach out to those folks and see if they can help mentor you into potential role or potential project. And that's really what I love doing is this party planning, people introducing, networking.
What would you say those then to the people who are listening to the podcast who are, they may think, hey, sponsorship is really what I need to be doing. Like I've got some mentees that I have unstructured occasional calls with, but maybe I need to take that mentorship relationship to the next level, or people who are actively looking for someone to share their experience with.
Yeah, I mean, we're living in a very interesting age right now. I mean, you're remote, I'm remote. Normally we're remote working, but now everybody's remote. So now we have sort of the barrier of entry has now been lowered where now we're just talking about time zones. So what I like to do, me personally, and like, past performance and not prediction for future growth in your sponsorship career. But I do recommend make yourself available. Like I have a Discord chat for my open source community. I do these things like I call it a pre-stream chat. So I go stream on Twitch, but before I go stream on Twitch, I open up my community and say, hey, let's chat with me, ask me questions. I will be as candid as possible. Let's talk salary. Let's talk how I got here. Let's talk about my future roadmap as far as like what I'm doing, talks, podcasts, whatnot. And let me invite you into my inner circle. And I would say out of a community of 300 plus people, which is a very, small community for what it's a big community for me, but like in the size and scope of so many other communities, it might be a very small drop in the bucket. But a very small percentage of those folks actually show up at the pre-stream chat. So we're talking like 4 or 5 folks who will take me up on my offer. And I would just say, set up a weekly stand-up, a weekly chat, a space or email list, a newsletter, or some place where people can just reach out to you and just make that the place where people can have access to your information. And then when it becomes overwhelming, it's time to grow somebody else up within that community. And then now we can sponsor, we can mentor together.
It sounds like I'm hearing you say that showing up, simply being present is such an important fundamental aspect of not just open source, but bringing people into tech. How do we get people to understand that? Like showing up, it can be as simple as being a regular at your user group, even if it's over Zoom, because there's something about meeting someone, going to sleep, and then waking up the next day and they're still in the world. And you go, oh, you're that guy from yesterday.
How many, like I'm privileged that I have access to a GitHub office. The GitHub office in San Francisco, we just remodeled it. Like we're obviously not in it right now, but the first floor has been the talk of the town of San Francisco for years. Now it's about to be even bigger once everybody gets vaccinated and we can do events again. But the amount of times I've held one-off, Ruby events, JavaScript events, and like this stuck around and like talked to everybody, like made them feel welcomed. It's something that I've actually brought up when I joined GitHub as an employee a couple years ago. I moved to the Bay Area for hopes and dreams to work in startups and learn how to code better. But the thing that I really struck me is I spent 4 years in the Bay Area before joining GitHub. and I never met a GitHub employee, even though there's a full office in there. I just never had access to the GitHub office. I never had access to any GitHub employees. And what I do as part of like my dev role at GitHub, we used to run this program called IRL, and the goal was let's get GitHub employees in real life. And that was a program I did and was helped to sort of get other GitHub employees along for the ride to help get them in front of folks and answer questions. But I would just say like really it is about staying around, answering questions, making yourself available. Like definitely if you're not a person to like, I love rambling, I can talk forever, but if you're not a person that can sort of exert and always have conversation, just write up a couple blog posts about like things you've learned in the last week, even if you don't think they matter, like have those on the ready. Because the amount of times I've had a blog post about, a GitHub action or a weird caching issue, and I was able to share that in a random tweet or a Twitter conversation. It makes me feel good, but also makes the person feel good that I had the answer for them. Because how many times have you been on Stack Overflow and like 2 weeks later, no one's even looked at your minute question in your own situation?
I think that people see so many like quote unquote influencers and advocates and people online that they think, I just got started. Nobody wants to hear about my experience with Python or how I found learning about .NET. So I just won't even put my keystrokes into that. But I've always felt that if you can put a blog post up and one additional person who is not you saw it,
Yep.
You've literally doubled your keystrokes. And that simple idea has propelled me for the last 30 years, even in doing this podcast. Like if you and I have one other person listening right now and they go, I never thought about that. I'm glad Brian came on the show and let me think about mentorship that way. Then we're like, awesome. That was total win.
And it's funny because that's something I heard you say like 8 years ago. And if you went to bit.ly/c/6 zeros, which is black in CSS, and then DE, so it's black. So it's anyway, bit.ly/code. That's my blog. And that's a blog I started on a Blogspot because I was told, like, don't build your own blog because you're going to spend way more time, massaging the CSS and not actually writing. So I built a Blogspot and I would just write at least 500 words a day on something I learned. So like some of the earlier posts is like git stash. Like when I learned about git stash as a command, I was blown away. Like someone just did it and they're like, oh, you don't know about this? And it's like, no, I don't know about this. I just started coding 6 months ago. And like, it blew me away that I would just write like basically two tweets a day on everything I learned that day. And it was just like unstoppable. And that's what really fueled my wanting to share because I would win, I would learn from those blog posts. And I remember actually you saying that early in my career on a podcast about this writing stuff down and like helping your future self sort of get out of those sort of coding blocks.
Yeah, it's just so we can Google ourselves later.
Yeah.
Like I'm so old. I'm so old now that I will Google for stuff. I'll get an error message and I'm like, oh, I had that in 2003. Crap, And then you find your own blog post because you forgot that you even wrote that.
Yeah, the web is circular. So like now, I guess maybe server-side rendering is back or that people care about it. But that was a solved problem like 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 10 years ago. But yeah, eventually that blog post will double in value or double your keystrokes, as you said.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm also glad that you didn't say that you read those in middle school because I had someone do that to me a couple of weeks ago, and they were like, "Yeah, I've been reading your blog since middle school," and that was not the move that I needed that day.
Yeah, I mean, I look good for my age, but yeah, definitely not middle school.
Clean living.
Exactly.
I understand that you also have a podcast.
Yeah, I do have a podcast. Actually, I do have a couple. So first podcast is This Developing Story. So the same way I did that blog that I mentioned, I created a podcast like This American Life, but This Developing Story, which is actually another knockoff of one of your previous projects too as well. I think you had a project very similar to that. Maybe I'm conflating.
Rob Connery and I had a thing called This Developer's Life.
Yes, that's what it was. Sorry, I it's a long time coming. I stole everything that I know from you. But then I do have another podcast called Jamstack Radio.
I had no idea about this when I invited you on the show. I had absolutely no idea that this was.
So I've been waiting and scheming. I've been trying to close my network enough that you would invite me on the show so that I can tell you you're the reason I'm here.
Well, a very wise individual had told me once that the web is circular. So
yes. Exactly. I'm already getting double my keystrokes from that one statement. So those show notes are going to be pretty hot
You're
later.
getting quoted from just minutes ago.
Excellent.
All right. Well, as the show runs down, we are left with a question. There are folks that are listening right now that are either excited about being mentors or they are desperately in need of mentorship themselves. How do we put them together? How do we get people excited? Is GitHub the place where that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think GitHub's a great place to discover code. And I think we have some cool features that we'll be shipping hopefully in the next year that will help that be a better place to find mentorship and mentors. But I do I'll honestly always point people to Twitter. So every Wednesday night, Code Newbie, they do a hashtag and also dev discussions on Thursday as well. There's a quote where the man with the one eye is king in the land of the blind. So if you went to the Code Newbie hashtag and you were looking for people to mentor and you provided answers to question and you took note of everybody who was really excited about learning how to code, like you will be, I guess, loved by so many people on the internet if you just sort of showed up in that space. Now, if you're looking for people to mentor you, I highly recommend go to places like Dev2, start writing blog posts, start sharing. And I recommend Dev2 only for one reason. It's easy to get started. So don't worry about building your own blog from scratch using the latest and greatest. To start writing quick 250 to 500 character blog posts about what you learned today. And then once you can get consistent with that, you'll find people will support you and continue to provide more context and content for the stuff that you're writing. So like maybe you got it wrong yesterday. They're going to provide some context and content, hopefully in the nicest way possible, about how you can get it right tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian Douglas, for chatting with us today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.